Welcome to another stream from Windows on the World. And tonight we're going to be talking about the great conspiracy swindle and mind control. This is actually going back to our archive and beyond, because over the years we've covered all aspects of governance. And I've been talking recently about how one governs oneself through the Perfected Minefield series. And we're going to get into that too. But all this is about information which is useful for the person who is ready for the information. And somebody posted something quite prescient in our Discord group tonight. And it's one of the things that's very important to know, which is the real versus the stated goals. They said words to the effect of, once you know the who, what, where, and why, then the rest of it is just noise, which indeed it is, because we can go on talking about events, why things happen, and the minutiae of detail. But the real reason is who did it and why and what is the outcome. So once we get bogged down in masses of detail, a bit like the old 9/11 groups used to do, they started infighting, and that infighting was started to drive apart the 9/11 so-called truth movement. And it was getting a lot of traction. Many people were questioning it, but in a way which was pointing a finger at the perpetrators. Now, the point about all this, of course, is that once you know who the perpetrators are, then the whole thing becomes a lot easier to decode and your reality will completely change. And that, of course, is not what they wanted. So what happened was they set people against each other, with people like Judy Wood coming in with her 1,000-page book, and then competing theories of how the towers came down. Now, of course, nobody actually really knows the fine details of that. There was a lot of theories around it, and some of them very interesting and very credible. A friend of mine in Sweden actually worked out the nuclear yield which brought the towers down from the mini nukes. But the point being here that all we really need to know is who did it and why. And once we know that, we can act accordingly. And that is very important. So tonight's show is called The Great Conspiracy Swindle Mind Control. And it might be part of a series of these, because I thought it was such a good title, The Great Conspiracy Swindle, because a lot of people who are deeming themselves to be sort of awake to things are often in these group egregors, groupthink. Now, egregors are these mind groups that people get sucked into. So in other words, they'll believe one thing, then they won't believe another thing. And that will lead them to miss out on the bigger picture. And this is the problem I had when talking about communitarianism in the UK, how global to local governance works. In other words, people are so fixated on blood drinking cannibals, underground tunnels, military bases, aliens, and all the rest of the distractions that are put there deliberately, that they miss what's in front of them, what's on their own doorstep, when they can actually do something about it. And that is where individual responsibility for oneself comes in. That is where connecting to a higher power comes in. And that is where you actually start to make some progress. And then life becomes much more interesting. And of course, it's better that life is interesting rather than boring. So mind control happens by defining reality and limiting available experiences within that reality. So, of course, we see that with the far left and the far right and the way that's steered. So, if you are deemed to be on the right, then you believe in certain things and you support certain issues. On the left, it's another group of designated issues. All of this is nonsense. All of this is lies, and it has nothing to do with the way things are governed. So that is the most important thing. I noticed recently that some people I knew from 20 years ago have caught up with me, and it's almost like they've gone backwards. In fact, they have gone backwards, because they were exploring their own reality 20 years ago. Now they're either joining the Tommy Tards, the Tommy Robinson, Zio group, or they are going down some other rabbit holes. And it seems to have all gone into these group egregors, which I found very disturbing in one way, but interesting in another, as to why some people move on, why some people can see the fork in the road and others can't. Because, of course, after the COVID agenda, a lot of people thought they had kind of seen the bigger picture. Of course, they didn't see the bigger picture, because they're still being steered by agents of the state. And we did several shows on that. One's called Agents of Revolution, and it's an article called Agents of Revolution. We did things called Empower Your Community. I actually went through a period of linking all these articles. We did another one called COVID Protest Social Engineers, which upset a lot of the so-called truthers because they don't like the real truth. They like their truth. And that is really the whole way this system works. That's actually communitarianism 101. So once you know what and why, the rest is just noise, said someone in our Discord group, which preempted this show. And that's the difference between those not under mind control and those who are addicted to the news cycle and the conspiracy cycle. So blowing the minds of people and those who proclaim to be awake has been quite an interesting thing over the past 7 to 8 years, because what's happened is most of them have fallen by the wayside. I've had people phone me up and I've told them the truth about some of the issues that they've been following, some of the groups they've been steered into, and it's almost like they have gone into a blackout. They've gone into a void. They've gone into a trauma, the black hole, which is what, of course, these social engineers talk about, the tabula rasa, which is the blank state where the wilderness of the mind can be introduced. And when you tell people the real truth behind something, it's so unacceptable to them, even those who say that they have the bigger picture, that they go into this state. I've had people literally just cut me off after what I've said to them. They just cannot handle it. But all of it is based on fact and real experience. So that's quite an interesting thing, I think. And that really was what drove me to put together the Perfected Minefield, because that's about getting onto the next level, which is much higher. And that's how you govern yourself through a system which is actually not very effective at what it does. And that's the thing with technocracy. Technocracy is not a good system. It was never going to be a good system because it's based on micromanagement. Once you start overtly micromanaging people's lives, as in the proposed digital ID that's coming out in the UK, a lot of other countries have digital ID, but the UK is the test base for this. The Crown, of course, is the test base. Australia and New Zealand also will be under this, as they have been all through what's been going on over the past 5 years. But this is the point, that overt control never works. So it's already failed. And that's what to me is really interesting, because out of that can come new civilization. But to get a new civilization, you have to define what you are and what the higher power is and what you're going to do with it and how you are going to move forward. And that is really the only thing of importance in life, really. And people get bogged down into going down all of these rabbit holes, which are of no issue in the way that they are governed and the way that they can move forward. So yes, I've seen all sides of the system, and I think that is very empowering after you've gone through it all. And I'm not trying to sound blasé here, but I've been doing this a long time, and it started off with looking at the administration system, you know, the executive and judicial part of the system, and then going into the global to local, then going into the different levels of how communitarianism, this idea of a top-down imposition which masquerades as the community, is imposed. And it's imposed in different degrees. It can be imposed with nudge units, behavioral change. Then it goes into what they call direct action. Then it goes into ad hominem attacks and the Saul Alinsky rules, which you can read, Rules for Radicals, which is the template for a lot of this governance stuff. windowsontheworld.net, go to the free books page. Saul Alinsky was a radical activist in the 60s, and he and his Rules for Radicals are the template for the activism which we see in the world today. So it's quite important to know about that. But I've literally seen the petty side of it, to taking counsels on in court, to the orchestration of murders. And this is the bigger picture, because when we see this different levels, then it's quite clear that it's all done in the same way. A friend of mine had a charity that was taken over. You can read about it in an article called Small Venues and Charities Under Attack. And it was a sustained attack over 3 years. I was trustee of a small charity which had just recovered from being attacked, really. They were trying to take the property, and then the attacks got worse. And I told my friend that they were using the Saul-Alinsky rules, and that what they were doing, the ad hominems, the defamation which they were posting through people's letterboxes about the trust, and the physical attacks on the trustees would stop, because the thing with the Saul-Alinsky rules is they attack you and they gang stalk you for a short period of time. That what they do then is run out of ideas because these people aren't very bright. Now, this might seem really bizarre to some people that this would happen, but yes, indeed, I've seen it um, to the stage of induced suicides. This gang stalking, and that's what is a popular term, gang stalking, and people from the conspiracy world, they talk about this, but this is actually the way local governance works. And of course it's just a mafia type thing, but the mafia have much more honor than the communitarian system. I'd much rather deal with a mafia boss than a communitarian, because at least you know where you stand with the mafia. You may have to pay them a certain amount of money, and even years ago my friends who owned clubs had to pay protection money to various people. But of course, the protection money you paid meant you were actually protected. So that it wasn't just about handing over money to a bunch of thugs. There was a kind of code of honor within it. It wasn't just that they would stop from coming around and smashing up your premises. It was a little more than that. It was about a local control system in the area. So what we've got now is the kind of opposite. It's this overt control, which is through systems, through the state, global to local. And this technocratic thing will not work because it's never worked. Overt control of a population has never worked in the history of mankind. Why would it want to start working now? And that's the interesting thing to me, that these British social engineers, we talk about the Tavistock Institute, the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations. I made a few notes here because there's so many of them, but Harvard Psychological Clinic. I was reading about a lot of this stuff today because I did shows on it over the years, and it all came out of this idea of governance by people who thought they were elite thinkers. Well, actually, they're bloody thick. These people are stupid. They are not intelligent in the true sense. They do not have expanded awareness. They believe in overt control of people who they deem to be less intelligent than themselves. But newsflash, news just in, they're thick as shit. And that is really good to know, because we found that out during the COVID era, how badly that was implemented. In fact, that was one of the best things that ever happened in the respect of finding out how badly put together the system for controlling people under technocracy really is. Of course, they're going to try and bring in more and more of this, but to me, I find this just like a challenge, and I think that's the idea, that this has to be put out there in the respect that it's about moving forward and becoming more literate and intelligent. The rest of it doesn't matter. The ancient civilizations of the past that reached high achievement all did this. So that's what interests me. What the globalists are doing doesn't interest me anymore, because I know how they're doing it. I keep an eye on it, but I don't get into the news cycle. It's a complete waste of time. And so, for instance, with the Charlie Kirk killing, once you know who did it and why, it's obvious who did it and why to anyone with a functioning brain cell, then you don't have to keep talking about that. It's part of the system that's being imposed. So it doesn't matter whether it's a murder or whether it's your local council imposing something on you without your consent. It's all done to the same template in the same way. The world governance system is extremely simple now, has been since 2010. So the best system for control is where the slave thinks that they're free, of course. And technocracy is actually the opposite. It's top down disguised as bottom up community. So those imposing it through institutions, as I said, are stupid. I've got some notes here because I'm trying to keep on track. They only get away with it because a large percentage are a lot thicker than they are, and also a lot lazier. As I said, I think this comes down to personal responsibility and how we govern ourselves. Useful idiots trained in the modern day Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, Alfred Milner, Round Table, the subsidiaries of the present are all from the past. So the present system of global to local governance is just an extension of this system done under the false premise of man-made global warming. That is the biggest driver of change and the biggest mind control program ever introduced and used against the population of the whole planet. That's the biggest mind control system that's ever been put in place. Sustainable Development Agenda 2030. That's why I cover it so much, because mind control at other levels is dwarfed by that one. So yes, useful idiots trained in the modern day Rhodes and Milner Roundtable subsidiaries of the present thousands of NGOs. In actual fact, the whole purpose of this governance system, I've got a few notes here, and we're going into the Club of Rome documents too. We're going into the first global revolution, and of course, limits to growth, which they were obsessed with limits to growth. The idea that commodities had to be controlled because they were finite and there was too many people on the planet. They're still obsessed with this. It's completely way out of date. But if you read Jack Atali's book, Millennium Winners and Losers, actually don't read it. It's boring. I think I've mentioned that before. But it basically lays out the plunder which they want to impose. And what is the point of it? Their governance system is pointless. Look what's happened in the cities. I look at the venues I used to do gigs in, all gone, all blocks of flats. Now, the thing is that if everywhere is just blocks of flats, what happens? You get a monoculture, which is what they're trying to introduce, and no real excitement anywhere. But the point is that you can't control this creativity. This goes also into when people talk about these music business conspiracies, because I know loads of people in the music business. I worked in it for years, and yes, there is overt control in some respects. But when you look at bands who have created great music, they were first and foremost musicians. Anyone who's a musician will know this. Look at the Grateful Dead. There is no one on the planet who made music like them. That was completely organic, couldn't have happened and be put together through some kind of mind control program. And this is where I call it conspiratardation comes in, because people start going down rabbit holes, making stuff up, and then missing the point. And they missed the actual steering. Yes, the LSD movement was completely steered, and they were actually involved in that. Well, they would be because they were there at the time, but it doesn't mean that they were part of some great conspiracy. And this is, I think, where people fall down, go into the rabbit holes, and most things that govern people are done in extremely simple way. And of course, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was founded around 1921, but we can look at some quotes here. I think this is quite interesting. Yes. This is Kurt Lewin, who was another retard, another globalist kind of elite thinker. The elite thinkers, of course, go through the sausage machine of Oxford, Cambridge, or public school system, and then they are traumatized into these movements and ideas which are called social engineering. So he says, if terror can be induced on a widespread basis into a society, then society reverts to a tabula rasa, a blank slate, a situation where control can easily be instituted from an exterior point. Yeah, well, I think anyone would know that, wouldn't they? Put it another way, by the creation of controlled chaos, the populace can be brought to the point where it willingly submits to greater control. Lewin maintained that society must be driven into a state equivalent to that of an early childhood situation. He termed this societal chaos fluidity. Now, anybody with a functioning brain cell can see that is absolute garbage. And indeed, we are in times of arrested development. But again, that is the choice of the person, whether they are in arrested development or not. When we look at the ancient civilizations with their oral culture, they were learning all the time. They were passing down information and expanding their knowledge base. When that stops, society implodes. That's what's happened now. So the aims and objectives of social engineering, behavioral change, and psychology have all failed. They've all failed spectacularly. Of course, because they're based on garbage and they're not able to take account of people who can think beyond the way that they are trained to think. So they are, of course, in a group egregor. So technocracy is just another group egregor. Technocracy on its own could be used as part of a governance system, but within itself, it is not a governance system. So this is interesting. We did a show in 2014 and it was just posted in the Discord group. And in the middle of the show, there was a section that had been filmed of a Palestine protest with George Galloway and a few members of the Marxist trade unions. And they had the same banners and the same sound bites as they do now. So that genocide has been going on for over 10 years. And it's only ramped up recently. But the placards that people were allowed to have and the sound bites they were given have not changed in 10 years. Isn't that interesting? So Palestine Action, this street theatre group for elderly people, which has been constructed by the City of London, came out of Just Stop Oil and all that sort of stuff. And of course, Extinction Rebellion, who brought in your very own citizens' assemblies through the George Soros Foundation sortition, which was actually approved by 7 parliamentary committees. So they approved your George Soros top-down, you believe in man-made climate change, what we're going to do about it, are we going to take your house and you're going to pay £25,000 to start retrofitting your houses. I was talking about this 15 years ago, so when it came in, it was no surprise. But of course, through the citizens' assemblies, you voted for it. The real versus the stated goals is there all the time. And as we said, I think that's what this show's about. It's about you taking back your own power and going, wait a minute, this is simple. The Truther program, yeah, it's now cozy and it caters for all. The marches, the meetups, the festivals, the merchandise, all useless, all organized to corral minds into going nowhere. In other words, not going anywhere. And it's worked spectacularly. and that is why I started to move on to much more interesting things, because I was looking into the systems of governance for such a long time that when all these idiot truthers came along, it just went downhill. It was like being in a special needs school, and it still is to a great extent. And I'm not saying that everyone's in that. They're not. They're obviously not. It's just that it's deteriorated and degenerated in all forms of media to arrested development. So if you're in this news cycle all day and you're watching, oh, did they do this? Did they do that? Oh, was this steered and was that steered in the past? Well, you're just wasting your time because, of course, things are steered. We look at the outcomes, the intentions and the outcomes. That's all you need to know. The real versus the stated goals. There's always a cover story in this system. So everything you're told through the mainstream is a cover story for something. And you can go deep under the surface, or you can just look at it and go, I know that's a scam. I was in northern Turkey and a fella kept walking past with his dog. I was camping there and he didn't speak any English. So we were having a chat, having a coffee. And he said, what do you think of COVID? I said, it advanced the globalist agenda and the globalist aims. And he said, I think it was a scam. So it doesn't matter how you put it, as long as people know the real versus the stated goals, then they can act accordingly. That was, I think, a good example. Just keep it simple. Yeah, we did a show called Behavioral Change, Pound Shop Propaganda. And it was Out of the Pandemic Program. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? It was called Out of the Pandemic Program. So this group, the Behavioral Change Insights team, which the government announced spectacularly a lot of times during the COVID intervention, was actually founded in 2010. And I'll just give you a little bit of a background of that, because this is very important to know, because this is part of the retarded steering. Because we have to remember that the people in behavioral change are idiots. They wouldn't do it otherwise. You'd have to be an idiot to try and manipulate people in such a benign, banal way. They think it's benign the way they're doing it, but it's obvious when you can see when you're being steered through Delphi technique, for instance, which was invented by the Rand Corporation in 1954, a way of getting group consensus. In other words, you say, what do you want, Coke or Pepsi? They're both the same. Or you say, well, What would you like, green or yellow? We haven't got yellow this week. You're going to have green. That's basically what it is. They just close doors. So they take you to how much more cycling would you like to see? Do you think there's too much pollution in your area? Oh, great. We'll get rid of the cars then. See, very simple. Close all the streets off. That's what behavioral change is all about. And every council has a behavioral insights and change team, behavioral change team. It's part of every council. What they're doing is like a retarded version of what the Tavistock Institute were doing in 1921. And the people in local government are generally really thick, cunning, duplicitous, often lie through their back teeth, but they're really thick. And I know that because I've taken on councils before, and the people who turn up are really dumb. They're very malicious, though, and they want to scare you. They do all the Saul Alinsky stuff, but behind it, there's nothing. So this is not a system that's ever going to work, because this is how the system works. It works through NGOs. It works through favored corporations. It works through their partners. It works through NGOs. NGOs are the biggest infiltration mechanism in the world for the global governance system, including, of course, anthropogenic global warming, which controls everything, the biggest mind control program ever invented. And that's including the Roman cults, the Roman Catholic cults, because, of course, they took this on. But, of course, this affects everyone on the planet on a daily basis. It doesn't affect people who just believe in a cult. And it is the biggest cult ever invented. The climate change cult is the biggest cult which was ever invented in the history of mankind, because it affects everyone in the world and it drives a new financial system. So we've covered that a lot. And this, to me, is the nitty-gritty stuff. But it says this behavioural insights team was a 7-person unit originally at the heart of the UK government, to a global social purpose company, a global social purpose company of over 200 professionals, useful idiots, across many offices around the world. In December 21, we became wholly owned by the innovation charity Nesta. Who are they? We are Nesta, the UK's innovation agency for, guess what? You'll never guess. We are the UK's innovation agency for social good. The common good. We've all agreed. We all want the same thing. Oh, that's fantastic, isn't it? We all appear to have agreed. We design new solutions. Well, what they do is they just steer people into the already intended and stated outcome. So it's very, very simple. If you want people to go to A to B to C, you make it look as though the people are going there by their own volition. Very simple, isn't it? We design new solutions, we test them rigorously and help them to spread nationwide. How? By bringing our teams of designers, data scientists, and behavioral scientists to work. Scientism. Scientists. Scientism. This was also announced about 100 years ago, that science would be this new form of governance. And look how dumb it really is. Behavioral scientists to work with partners across the public and private sector, from local authorities and nurseries to supermarkets and energy companies, by harnessing the power of the arts to understand social problems and design solutions, by building new companies from scratch and investigating in early stage ones, by looking at what gets in the way of innovation and unblocking it. Anyone who can't decode that is an absolute idiot. Anyone who can't see through that is really not even on the first rung of the ladder of knowledge. It says by controlling all public, this is it, by controlling all public organizations through agents of change and fake sustainability, and enforcing it through government policy, through data manipulation and flat out lies. No, that's not them, that's me. That's me summarizing it from a show, because I brought together some elements of different shows we've done. That is it in a nutshell. I'll read it out again. By controlling all public organization through agents of change and fake sustainability, and enforcing it through government policy and data manipulation, and of course, flat out lies. The subversion of language has always been the main tool of propaganda. I'm going to give you something here which is really, really funny. I found it today, and it's the logical follow-up to 20 miles per hour zones. And it's from a newspaper. And I posted this in our Discord group. And I think I'll just go and find it actually, because I can't remember the actual title of the article. And it's really, really funny, this. I'm just going to get it out because it's, oh, here it is. Yes. I'm going to read it out. Slovakia adopts a speed limit for pedestrians. Yes. Micromanagement is the goal of the global parasites. They use behavioral change teams and institutions to come up with this garbage. So their system is finished. So it says here, Slovakia adopts a speed limit for pedestrians. Power walking will soon be illegal in Slovakia as law changes to prevent sidewalk accidents. It's always for the common good. Everything is framed as a benefit. Everything is framed as a benefit. You can only walk 6 kilometers per hour if you want to follow the law in Slovakia. This is coming in on the 1st of January 2026, by the way. The Slovak Parliament Tuesday afternoon adopted an amendment to the traffic law that sets a maximum speed permitted on sidewalks in urban areas at 6 kilometers per hour, not 6 miles an hour, that's 6 kilometers an hour. I reckon I walk faster than that normally. The limit applies to pedestrians, cyclists, skaters, and scooter and e-scooter riders, all of who are allowed on sidewalks, and aims to avoid frequent collisions. So if you slow people down into a drone mentality, basically dribbling along, because what sort of people walk fast? People with purpose and intention and things to do. What's the aim of communitarianism? Sloth, inward looking misery and compliance. So they want you to walk slower. So you are going literally nowhere in your mind and in your body. Because of course, if you walk fast, your brain starts moving faster too. Mine does anyway. The limit applies to pedestrians, cyclists, skaters, and it aims to avoid frequent collisions. How many frequent collisions are there? Well, there are frequent collisions when these idiot cyclists ride on the pavement. I mean, they're the problem, but the cyclists are what they want everyone doing, you see. So they're going to say, pedestrians, you're going to have to slow down also. Because I remember when the first mini Holland travesty of Agenda 2030 was introduced in northeast London, they framed it in their buzzword schedule as walk, cycle, enjoy. So now you have to walk slowly and cycle slowly and enjoy it. It says the main goal is to increase safety on sidewalks in light of the increasing number of collisions with scooter riders. Of course, we'd have to see the statistics on that. And the statistics are going to say, well, 65% of people say that they've been in collision with an e-scooter or a bicycle in the last 2 years. They just make them up because the people who do the surveys are working for the people who impose the policy. So there's no separation of powers there, you see. I've seen it a million times. I mean, it's audacious. They plan whole areas on the back of flat out lies that people have agreed. Of course, they never did. Happened in the Elephant and Castle regeneration. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. They used the Delphi technique. They put people on tables of 10. They had paid facilitators who didn't work for the council, who ran away when they were asked for their personal details of contact. And then someone got up and said, well, my business wasn't consulted about this. And they said, we'll have to try harder. He said, well, here's another 800 businesses that haven't been consulted. In other words, they consulted nobody because they expect no one to remember, or none of the businesses to actually be at the meetings because they don't advertise the meetings. So yes, this is interesting. It's like they're going against each other with this agenda. It says Martin Pekar of the opposition Liberal Party, Progressive Slovakia, sounds grim, doesn't it, said pedestrians face danger from cars, not cyclists or scooters, and that the amendment penalises sustainable transport. So here we have the anti-car lobby actually going against the people who want to slow pedestrians down. This is where it all implodes beautifully. That's fantastic news. If we want fewer collisions, we need more safe bike lanes, not absurd limits that are physically impossible to follow, Pekar said. At the mentioned speed, a cyclist can hardly keep their balance. The amendment has sparked a wave of amusement on social media, with some wondering whether running to catch a bus could get them fined. So this is where behavioral insight and behavioral change becomes comedy, and that's where it becomes fun. In actual fact, during the COVID era, there was a lot of fun to be had. I had tremendous fun during that era. Once you break through the nonsense and look at it, it's actually quite rewarding. And of course, all of this was in documents, and the whole reason to empower yourself is to read those documents. A Safer Future 2007 predicted COVID and how it would be imposed by each country on other countries, and through the UN World Health Organization system, which of course it was, and that system is useless. It's not fit for purpose. The UN as a lobbying body is completely useless. The UN as a form of governance is completely useless. It was based on the works of the social engineers and then the New Age. The New Age is a massive part of the United Nations steering group. And a lot of this stuff failed years ago as far as ideology goes. So, yes, we've done a series called Ritual and Religion, and it was in our Perfected Mindfield series and playlist. So, Ritual and Religion was covered, and that was the name of one of the shows in the Perfected Mindfield series. And we talked about providence and right action, and that's very important when we're talking about the discrimination needed to know which things to look into and which things to discard, because 99% of the information on the internet is worthless. It's of no use to you. It has to be specific information related to what you want to know. And once you know it, as we said, the real versus the stated goals, there's very little else to know, because a lot of the rest of it is speculation. The views of the crowd are artificially imposed. Most people will say they have their own minds. Being captive is hard to admit to. Getting back to what I was talking about at the beginning, I've had people phone me up over the last year. I've told them things which blew their minds. They thought they were awake to the bigger picture. They were nowhere near it. When I said, oh, but did you know about this? Did you know about that? Did you know how they did this? Did you know that this was steered in this particular way? And they are genuinely, completely shocked. And of course, they then think shooting the messenger is the best idea. So you don't hear from them again, because what you've told them has shattered their worldview. Having your worldview shattered continuously is absolutely fantastic. I'd recommend it to anybody. I really would. So they let an imposed system speak through them and for them. The worldview then is a constructed norm which is adapted to different genetics. So it works in different countries in slightly different ways, and it's done according to the temperament and the genetics of the people. That's a basic though, isn't it, really? Because of course, different people have different temperaments. Once you get to hotter countries, people have different temperaments. When you get to colder countries, people have different temperaments. This is baby stuff. But this is what the social engineers were working on for a very long time. Perceptions can be managed through imposed beliefs, group identity, etc., all of which restrict knowledge. Other weapons against higher perception are drugs and alcohol. There is nothing more attuned than the highest intelligence. How do you get to the highest intelligence? You stop wasting time on issues of relatively little importance. And this is where the great thinkers that I admired had got to. And even when I was younger, I liked to be around people who were very articulate and I could learn things from. If you're not around people who you can learn things from, move on, get different friends, because these groups have become stagnant. The groups that I was in 20 years ago were kind of groundbreaking, exciting. Now, a lot of those people are drones. They don't think they're drones, which is even worse. They think that they have a bigger picture. They think they've learned a lot. In fact, many of them have learned absolutely nothing, complete arrested development again. So shattering your worldview and having it shattered for you is one of the best things that can happen. Makes you learn, makes you move on. So there is nothing more attuned than the highest intelligence, and we covered that in our Perfected Mind Field series, and especially the show on providence. Once you get to a level where what you are doing is in tune with God's law, with the natural law. Because remember, everything that the globalists are doing is anti-nature. It's masquerading as a Gaia cult, but it's all anti-nature. It's all about plunder. It's about control. It's not about organic progress. Without organic progress, there is absolutely no point in control. And that is what they've reached. So all these people who are out front, at the front of technocracy, they are stuck. They can go no further. They are really part of an operation which is about plunder, control of all assets and people under a technocratic system. That system has already failed. So what are they going to do next? They haven't really got a plan B. They've got lots of distraction issues, pandemics, terrorism, and fear through the media. Fear of things which, in actual fact, are probably not as scary as people like to think. Because when you look at the worst possible outcome of something, it's generally not that bad at all. That's one of the Saul Alinsky rules. The fear of something is much bigger than the thing itself. That's one of the Saul Alinsky rules. And once you start using and looking at these rules and using them back against impositions on yourself, things really can change. And there's nothing clever about the Saul Alinsky rules. They just target people. Like, get your target, personalize it, freeze it, polarize it. That's why people get relentlessly attacked in the so-called community if they go against the so-called consensus. So the imposed worldview is a set of principles, views, and beliefs which dictate behavioral response, knee-jerk triggers. This is what they're talking about. This is what the early experiments on humans, the early experiments this century, of course, the late 1800s, the social engineering. We haven't got time to go into the history of that. But when we're talking about such places of arrested development as the Tavistock Institute and the Economic and Social Research Council, all of these things we've talked about, the hundreds of think tanks, the behavioral sciences, they all came out of the round table, really. This idea of empirical control, and that these idiot people who came up with these ideas were in some way in a position to enforce them, when of course they weren't. And we see that with the Anglo-Zionist project of what's happening now. It was never going to work, and it isn't working. But it's a City of London project, and at the end of the day, it's business. So another thing that's important is that people apparently 95% visual, and the remaining 5% is left for touch, taste, hearing, and smell. So actually accentuating the other senses is probably a good idea. But knowing this is essential for social engineering, because of course people are addicted to screens. Now, this is an interesting thing, because the internet is part of this wilderness of the mind, because it creates dissociation. People walking down the street looking at their phones all day. Dissociation. I was in a shop the other day and I was talking about history, and they said, "Oh, how much do you know about this?" So I started talking about it in a very enthusiastic manner, and they said, "Wow, you know more about it than I do." So I kept on with information which I thought they would find absolutely fascinating. Within a couple of minutes, they couldn't stand it anymore. They had to get back to nonsense. Their mind did not want to absorb it. That is the state of the brains of people under the control of technocracy. So technocracy is a failed, retarded, arrested development system. And the human side of that is called communitarianism. So anybody who is working within these institutions, which is imposing communitarian ideology, i.e. your local council, is by definition in arrested development. So that should empower you to realize that you are dealing with idiots, but useful idiots, well-paid idiots. That's all. So a word together with an image equals a concept. It becomes a reality, even if the two are not necessarily connected. Well, we see that in television. You'll get a voiceover which is got nothing to do with the pictures. And that's how they sell a lie all the time. It's basic, that. It's very, very basic. But people who are screen addicted will be unconsciously absorbing the narrative. Basic form of mind control. So that's really simple, that one. Logical fallacies, of course, rule the counter narrative. So in its simplest form, this is useful for advertising, this idea of television. On a more important level, it's used in religion. What is seen consciously goes into the unconscious. And you would say, well, that's obvious. It is obvious, but sometimes we need to hear it, I think, because everybody has unconscious desires and things which do need to surface. And of course, the pervert Freud, the loser Sigmund Freud, the liar Sigmund Freud, the degenerate Sigmund Freud, who they all worship, was part of this. He was talking about the unconscious, but his work within the unconscious was absolute garbage and proven to be garbage. And then, of course, it was interesting that he fell out with Carl Jung. Carl Jung was eons ahead of pervert Freud. Carl Jung was very intellectually interesting in many ways. I think he got rather long-winded, but what he was saying about personality is generally very well observed. So it's interesting that we had these two who actually fell out. But when I've been looking at it, I thought, why did Jung even talk to this tosser Freud in the first place? I could never work that out, my view on it. So yes, your worldview is polluted through repetitious programming. When one is fully conscious and not subject to images or this sort of control, then your awareness can progress. And this higher awareness is something you can carry around with you. I don't want to get too esoteric here, but it's something that I was trying to work out how to talk about, which is why I did the Perfected Mind Field series, because it's so important. You start to be able to read situations. Ultimately, you can read minds. And that's very useful. And that is where the ancient civilizations were going. Of course, the technocrats can't do any of this stuff, which is where people who are advanced in their thinking and actions will win every time. And that, to me, is the important thing. How do you form a new society within this communitarian system and start a new, interesting civilization? Because most of it is about the need for knowledge. And if knowledge has stopped, which it has with 99% of people at the moment, I try to get people interested in especially history, because history you can learn so much from. And as I said just now, that they start drifting off. They're not able to concentrate on anything and they're not interested in anything. That's one thing I found worse than not being able to concentrate, was the fact that they're not even really interested in it. So you're going on about something very passionately and they're not bothered. And I found this years ago when I was talking with great indignation about what was going on in the courts. They just shrug it off. And a lot of people are like that, but that is the mind control, you see. So breaking through all this is very, very important. And I know this is obvious to some people, but because I'm going to be doing more shows on this, I'm always trying to refine it. I did a series called The Perfected Mind Field. I did a series called The Protocols of Power a couple of years ago. But what I'm doing is constantly advancing with the knowledge. Otherwise, there's no point. I look at the the internet, and I don't find anything of much use in most places. There's a few people who will come up with something that's really good on things like, say, TikTok. I don't really go on it. I'm on it, but I don't post on it. I was thinking of putting stuff on there, but there's a couple of commentators on there, one or two, who just nail things, but the rest of it is garbage, of course. But that's interesting because they once you get more discriminating, the better stuff seems to come to you. You can filter out the garbage. You do have to have a garbage filter. It's very, very important now, I think. So yes, I mean, anything can be a programming device. Songs can be programming devices, conscious and unconscious triggers. This is what they were studying, used in advertising since the 50s. But I don't know about you, but advertising never had any effect on me at all. The placement of products never, it just had no effect on me whatsoever. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, that YouTube now is full of adverts. And incidentally, I think people who put 2 adverts on before they even start speaking are scamming you. That's just an insult to your intelligence. Side issue, but I think an important one. But advertising never had any effect on me whatsoever. It's interesting because when I was younger, I'd see people watching television and it would annoy me. I'd be sat there with them and think, is this all you're going to do? And they'd be looking out with this gormless look on their face, looking at the screen, and that would irritate me for some reason. I'd find that very, very irritating and walk off. Not to say I didn't watch television sometimes, which I did. So from screens, then the unconscious is where the most useful information is stored. So actually what you fill your head with and what you think you're just passively looking at and not really taking in does all go into the subconscious. So you can't fill your subconscious with garbage because you're going to have a lot to deal with when you go to sleep before you actually get to what's important. That's the basic, I think. So yes, the unconscious can be brought to the surface and lessons it teaches can be absorbed into conscious action. It's therefore necessary to be fully conscious as useless and negative information can be stored and become part of conscious action. Obvious. I know. But it is important that, because a lot of people do things that are from their subconscious. I've noticed this a lot. If you're saying something and they're a bit jealous of it or something like that, of course, their unconscious dislike of that comes out in ways that become apparent when you become more observant. And of course, this is what psychology was all about. But psychology and psychiatry have of course, failed. They were a creation of 100 years ago, which were used as governing systems and management of people. And I think largely it's failed because it's impossible to control people who are intelligent or working on a higher intelligent level. It's completely impossible to control them. You can't do it. So yes, it's therefore necessary to be fully conscious as useless and negative information can be stored and become part of conscious action. I think that's really important now. During sleep, it is believed that processing of ingested images and information takes place. If things are working properly, the information in the subconscious can be the most powerful. So yes, we're talking about the dumb version of providence here, which fills most people's minds. So yeah, we've talked about egregors quite a lot. Groupthink, people being in groups. The egregor is an occult concept representing a thought form or collective group mind. Have to be really careful with this one because the groups that I've been involved with, the ones that are taken apart from the inside or the outside, using the principles of the social engineers, the chaos to create the tabula rasa, which is where people are shattered into disillusionment. I've seen that time and time again, but there was no need for that to happen. And it's interesting how groupthink and group structure works, because if a group doesn't have a central aim, there is no purpose for that group, especially now. It's not saying that if you're a member of a model railway society or something like that, you have to have an aim. That's slightly different. I'm talking about groups who get together with a general affiliation for doing something. If they haven't got a central aim and a way of reaching that aim, then it's a complete waste of time. And there's groups that I know from 20 years ago that are still going, completely wasting their time, like those idiot doctors still talking about COVID. I was telling one of them about the global to local governance system. They never spoke to me again. Again, they had their petty illusions of society shattered. Hence, they are in arrested development. Hence, they will be talking about COVID even when the next one comes along. A bit like the 9/11 people were stuck for 20 years. So, yeah, an egregor, though, is a non-physical entity. It arises from the collective thoughts of a distinct group of people, and it becomes a belief system. And these egregors have a life of their own. In other words, the collective minds of the people form a larger mind field. So you have to be careful what you put into your mind if you're going into a group. Now, this is quite advanced thinking when you think about it, isn't it, really? We have covered the collectivizing of all into groups, into something for everyone, the system of moods. One step further is how bioenergetic principles attract people unconsciously as well as consciously. Those who are susceptible to cults and attracted to groups below the highest information field will all fall into these bioenergetic principles, which can be controlled. Now, this is high level stuff. We started out with simple mind control, but we're going a step further here. They resonate with the group biodynamic and then become a captive of it. In other words, you can do this, but you can't do that. We believe in this, we don't believe in that. The next thing, you're in a cult, which cuts you off from all outside information. That's the logical next stage for these kind of groups. So, as we know, the fake priesthood control the flow of information. Therefore, it is inorganic. Therefore, it is anti-divine. Therefore, it is anti-nature. Therefore, it is of no use. Therefore, it's failed. Most people allow themselves to be captured, however, in this way. We did a show called The Resurrection of Knowledge. Mind control happens by defining reality and limiting experience within that reality. That is your global to local governance. That is Delphi technique. That is saying, how much more cycling do you want? That is saying, do you think there's too much pollution? We're going to get rid of all the cars. Very, very simple. Define the reality, the boundaries of that reality, and limit the experiences available within that reality. When a change agent or infiltrator comes into a group, that's exactly what happens. So, yes, when they talk about mind control, who talks about this collective ideology that climate change is the biggest driver of governance in world history, the biggest mind control project in history, because it is the City of London's financial power structure throughout the world. And we've gone into that. Look at the fourth world if you want to look at this stuff. If you're new to the channel, you're probably going to find some of this stuff a bit heavy, but it is for the people who need to hear it. I'm not here to tell people what they want to hear. Not interested in that anymore. In fact, it's better that people who want to listen to this distraction go and listen to it and don't listen to this. I said this ages ago. People who listen to me and Russell Brand, go and listen to Russell Brand. Don't listen to this. You're wasting your time. And that is very, very important, because if people are polluting their minds with garbage, what they're listening to this for? Complete waste of time, because this is honed down information and it's there for a particular purpose. And a lot of the times in the past, what I've done is, and I do this on, or I did this on shows. I don't go on shows anymore. I did one last night, though, funny enough, in America. And it was completely different than anything they'd ever heard. And funnily enough, they didn't know hardly anything of what I was talking about. They'd never even heard of communitarianism. And a lot of the governing things that I was talking about, the principles, they'd never heard of them either. It's quite interesting, though. And the hosts were receptive to that. But the way that the so-called alternative media has been controlled is it's gone nowhere, and it's going nowhere. It never will go anywhere. But when it was pointed out to a couple of these clowns on some alternative media radio show about a year ago that they were indulging in trivia, wasting people's time, they didn't like it, because it brought them too close and too face to face with who they really were. And facing who you are is the most important thing. Like we've said before, I mean, the destruction of your reality, of your perceived reality, it's going through these different veils, different levels, and that keeps happening, but to a lesser and lesser degree. And once you get to a certain point, then you don't need to do that anymore. But I think sudden and rapid change is very good for anybody. And that's why I think that these pandemics and these impositions are in a way a good thing for people who are, in the real sense, resilient, because they keep you on your toes and they keep you wanting to be ahead of the game. So yes, the implementation of control is just through the real and the stated goals, the difference between the two, the cover story, the real story. I'm not sure how long we've been going, but I think it's quite a long time. So I'm going to have a look at how long I've been going here. Oh yeah, an hour. I think what I might do is I might split this into two. I might split this show into two because there is a lot of information I want to get through. I will go through some more because I wanted to go into scientism, the power of fake science, the control of all academia, industry, world leaders, decisions, all of the stuff that we've been talking about in a different kind of way. Pharaohs, the elite crowd control, etc. And the steering by social engineers of populist movements, because what we have now is populist movements that are incredibly banal. For the last 10 years, the captured hostages of the British Zionists who follow people like, and especially Tommy Robinson in Whitehall, have been going nowhere and have been steered by the JDL. It's not the EDL, it was originally the JDL for years, for about 10 years. And I think I said that on a show quite recently. I was down there years ago and I didn't even know there was one of these time wasting, energy harvesting festivals on. And I said to the copper, what's happening? He said, oh, Tommy Robinson's a lot of coming in there. The Antifa lot are coming in there. We're going to stand in the middle. They're both going to have their say and they're both going to go home. There you go. Nothing more to it. Isn't it interesting how the hostage, Tommy Robinson, the Israeli hostage, Tommy Robinson, been captured and taken to Israel. And when he is in the company of his controllers, the people who took him hostage, isn't he a different kind of character? A cowering wreck who has nothing to say. Well, isn't that strange? He shouts his mouth off on those marches. When he goes over there, he shuts his mouth. What's he got on him? Interesting, isn't it? This is governance. This is how it's all done. It's very, very simple. So when we talk about things like Epstein, just a form of governance, and it's the way things work. There's different increments of that, and a lot of the conspiracy crowd talk about it throughout show business and the media. It's all the same thing. It's governance, and you either get beyond that form of governance or you can fall a victim to it. And it's quite as simple as that. So I'm going to wrap this up because I've been going an hour and I've got like loads I wanted to talk about. And I was just to give you an example with this online harms bill and this technocratic imposition that's coming in with the digital ID. For instance, if you started a group today called the Village Green Preservation Society, it would be deemed far right, white privileged, and most likely you'd get a visit from the counter-terror police. And this is quite interesting because years ago, I thought, okay, it's best not to call a group a particular name, give it a very bland name. And I thought of a name for a group and I called it the Village Green Preservation Society because I thought it was so benign that nobody would really be interested in looking into it or infiltrating it. In other words, you could say, let's meet at the Village Green Preservation Society, and you could take that around to different places. But now that would be deemed far right. That shows you how things have changed. It's quite incredible, that, isn't it? And just as we close, I'm going to give you a story. I was helping a farmer with a court case about the Mendip hunt being on his land in Somerset. They'd left the gates open, his cows had got out. There was a court case, two court cases actually. And this fella had been very militant towards Worthy Farm, where they have the Pilton Pop Festival, now known as the Glastonbury Festival. He even put signs in the road about all the pollution. He was a big rival of Michael Eavis. So what he decided to do was post Michael Eavis's name on Facebook. At Glastonbury Festival that year, it was a few years ago, there was the Counter-Terror Command branch called Operation Servitor. Operation Servitor were there with their guns, surveilling the crowd. The anti-terror police were there. So this fella had posted on Facebook Michael Eavis's phone number, which was a public number, Worthy Farm public number. So he was raided by 15 anti-terror police at his farm. And I saw this. And the first thing they said is, have you got any guns? He said, of course I've got guns. I'm a farmer. So they said, we need all your guns. They took him to Yeovil police station. And the desk sergeant said, what's he in for? And the Counter-Terror Command, Operation Servitor, they said, posting Michael Eavis's phone number on Facebook, it's harassment. And the desk sergeant says, posting a publicly available phone number on Facebook is neither harassment nor anything else. He said, Mr. Chan, you're free to go, and I want a word with you lot. So that was a really comedic end to an event which had no terrorism whatsoever. And of course, terrorism went into errorism, and that went massively downhill. But all these things are drivers of change. And when we're looking at them, we don't need to go into intense detail now because things are moving very fast. We're way past 9/11. The terrorism now is these random attacks. And once you've decoded one, you've pretty much decoded them all. And we did that 20 years ago. So the idea is to move on and look through these forms of governance and get to a higher level of information and basically enjoy the moment. So that's what that was all about. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. I'm going to come back with some of this stuff because I didn't realize I've been going on an hour. I don't like to do much more than an hour, but I'm going to do more of these and obviously keep up with the history. I've been working on an audio book recently, and that audio book is Following the Protocols of Power. It's not a book that you read for enjoyment. It's a book that you can listen to because it's an audio book for information on how to deal with things, which through experience I've found have worked. And it gives you history, very important history. So that's the sort of audio book I'd like to listen to because I listen to a lot of books because I'm always researching. And also when I'm reading books, I found very few books really capture me. Their books tend to have some interesting stuff like this. I was looking at this old one today. It's called the Encyclopedia of Mind Control. It's mainly just, there's a lot of supposition in there. There's not that much detail, but there's some good times and dates for things. But I find a lot of books like that. So yeah, focusing information is the most important thing. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to be back quite soon with part 2 of this. And yes, we're going to be talking about the conspiracy swindle and much more important things. So hope you found that useful. I'm just going to have a look at the comments. So do info at windowsontheworld.net. That's the email, info@windowsontheworld.net. Stay in touch through the website. Thanks.